Hello. Welcome to the last section of Chapter 33 of the American Pageant on the Great Depression and the New Deal. Today we're looking at housing and Social Security through FDR's balance sheet, kind of the lasting legacy of the New Deal and some of the long-lasting things that were created by the New Deal we're going to get into. So to help housing, the Federal Housing Administration created the 1934, the FHA. They gave small loans to homeowners for the purpose of improving their homes and buying new ones. The government was giving aid, trying to encourage home buying, trying to encourage the construction sector to grow, and to get people, into a better housing situation. You also have the creation of the United States Housing Authority in 1937 that lent money to the states or communities at low-cost housing developments. The problem with a lot of these is they were regulated by how risky the loans were, and so they would go through certain sections of the town and rate if the loans would be paid back or not. And so this is where the infamous redlining came from, where areas of predominantly African American and the minorities were redlined on the maps, and basically people were told this is too risky of a loan. And so a lot of these programs really went and helped middle class and lower class whites, and didn't help the redlined neighborhoods in many of these cities, which in many places are still impoverished to this day. And then the idea of Dr. Francis Townsend, the Townsенdites came up with this idea of an old person pension. Was put into practice by Congress and FDR with the Social Security Act of 1935. It's not only an old age pension, but also disability payments for families. It's also unemployment insurance. You would get $18 a week if you were laid off, and so you and your business, your company would pay into this pot of money, and if you were laid off, they would pay part of your wages until you could find a job, which that was about $215 a week. Now, Social Security, you supposedly pay into the pot your whole life, and then when it's your turn to retire, they pay you not to work, opening up jobs for young people. This is actually my grandfather's Social Security card. He's passed away a long time ago, back in 1970. The original Social Security cards are made out of metal. This is, I believe, tin. And so if I had it here, it'd clank for you. The new ones, they're kind of paper, and if you wash them, you're in big doo-doo. Labor. So if you're a worker and there's a lot, if you've got 13 million people unemployed, you probably don't want to go on strike, and you probably don't want to ask for a raise. But there is some labor stuff going on. John L. Lewis of the United Mine Workers wanted to unite all industrial workers into a super union. He formed the Congress and Industrial Organization, the CIO, which later combines with the American Federation of Labor, which is still around today. The AFL-CIO is probably the biggest labor union in the nation. They joined together in 1938. They had about 4 million members by 1940. Big significant step for labor unions and for workers is the Wagner Act was passed in 1935 to explicitly protect union rights. One big strike of note in 1936 and 37, General Motors workers did a sit-in strike. Instead of going on strike and picketing outside the business where they could hire scabs, picket line crossers, you sit down on the job and refuse to work. Kind of ingenious. Many people do this for their whole career. Just go to a job and sit down and really act busy and don't really do anything. They prevented them from bringing in scabs by protesting in the building. It legitimized the United Auto Workers, and it worked. They did get what they wanted. You also have significantly the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, which finally banned child labor, except in family businesses and farming. And also set maximum hours. It also set the nation's first minimum wage at a whopping 40 cents an hour, which would be about $6.52 an hour today. So here's a picture of the men at the sit-in strike. They had people bring them reading materials. They had people bringing them food, and they just stayed on the job. They slept there. They did not leave, because if they did, they would be replaced until they met their demands. I'm pretty sure this guy works for the mafia, and he's doing a hit job. Watch out for that guy right there. He looks like a Wascowee character. This is a painting, Labor Triumphant 1937. Pretty cool. This is the percentage of employees that are unionized. In the United States, the green one, it kind of went down from the Progressive era to 1930 because of charges of communism and xenophobia. It went up during the 50s. It peaked, and this is kind of the peak of our U.S. economy in terms of the middle class. Kind of flatlines. It goes down a little bit to the 70s and then on down to today. You can see that most of the world kind of doing the same thing. And the Republicans, not liking Roosevelt because he was changing the face of America and he's a socialist, they nominated Alfred M. Landon to run against him in 1936. They condemned the New Deal for being radical, experimental, confusing. It's a frightful waste. They were spending money we didn't have. The Democrats had significant support of millions of people that had benefited from the New Deal programs. The people of the United States finally felt like somebody was fighting for them, that they had the government in their corner, and there was no way they were going to vote out the champ, FDR. He was reelected in a very lopsided victory. In fact, look at this electoral map. Wowzers. Vermont and Maine, they're stubborn. We're going Republican. We don't care. The rest of the country, FDR's the man. So in 1933, the 20th Amendment was actually ratified, and it moved up the inauguration by 6 weeks. Instead of the president being elected in November and then not taking over until March, like Lincoln had to, and there were 7 states that were in rebellion. While Roosevelt was waiting to get in office, he actually survived an assassination attempt. And you have the banking crisis, you have the run on banks, and so they moved up to Inauguration Day. So many of his re-election, basically he saw it as a mandate to continue the New Deal reforms. When you win this many states, when you get 61% of the popular vote and 98.5% of the electoral vote, that means the people want you to do your thing. And so he was doing it, except the Supreme Court, the pesky old Supreme Court was dominated by old crogy conservatives. They kept ruling the New Deal programs unconstitutional, the NIRA, the AAA, and then there was pending cases against the Tennessee Valley Authority about Social Security and the Wagner Act. So Roosevelt's throwing his hands up in the air going, what am I going to do? I keep trying to fix this. Congress and I are working together, and you guys are tossing them out. So he felt that they were overstepping their powers, that they were not doing what the Supreme Court was supposed to do. They didn't reflect public opinion. And so he just casually in a speech, he liked to talk off the cuff to the press, said, there's nothing in the Constitution about how many judges are in the Supreme Court. There's 9. What if we added 6? Now, people caught wind of what he was doing pretty quickly because a new Supreme Court judge is appointed by the president and approved by Senate. And so they quickly diagnosed what Roosevelt was trying to do, was trying to pack the court with his allies, his cronies, his buddies, to keep the New Deal programs coming. They felt like the president was overstepping his power. It would ruin the checks and balances system. When does it stop? Instead of 15, now there's 101, and there's 1,000 Supreme Court justices. Then anybody who wears Supreme shoes or has those stupid fanny packs, you're on the Supreme Court. I hope not. That would be terrible. And here's the political cartoon. He said, all I said was give me 6 more justices. He never formally proposed it, but the press went nuts. Congress went nuts. Republicans, Democrats, they hated it. And he's like, my bad. I just threw that out there. I'm going to back off on that one. However, the Supreme Court finally changed its tune and began to support New Deal legislation. They ruled the Wagner Act and the Social Security Acts were constitutional. And then also there was a series of deaths and resignations, and justices allowed him to actually appoint all 9 justices at one point. To this point, by 1937, not a single one had retired or died through his first term, and so they were all old stock Republican judges. And then in a stunning turn of events, they either died or resigned, or I don't know, Roosevelt beat him with a stick like this cartoon here, and he got to replace him with the judges that he wanted. Very few New Deal reforms were passed after 1937. The economy is getting back somewhat to normal. Things are kind of going well, and so there's not like this flurry of legislation coming out after 37. In his first term, unemployment ran high, recovery was slow. You also have what's called the Roosevelt recession. The economy was back to 1929 levels in 1937, and Roosevelt, never intending for this to be permanent, cut back the New Deal. He and Congress kind of ended a lot of the New Deal programs. They closed CCC camps, for instance, to balance the budget. And they never intended, like I said, this to be permanent. What it did is it sent the nation, unemployment shot up. It sent the nation back into a recession. And it really kind of showed artificially how much the government spending was propping up the economy. 4 million people lost their jobs and just because of this. And it's called the Roosevelt recession. This is 2-year kind of economic downturn that was caused by Roosevelt's cutting the New Deal spending. It led him to embrace the recommendations of British economist John Maynard Keynes. Keynesian economics, basically the government has used their money to prime the pump of the economy, to encourage consumer spending and policy intentionally creates a budget deficit. The government has a good enough credit, they have enough money-making abilities, they can go into debt to kind of stimulate the economy by priming the pump, which President Trump claimed that he came up with that, and it's not him, sorry. Congress passes the Hatch Act of 1937, which prevented federal administrative offices from active political campaigning and soliciting. Yeah, if you're working for the government, you probably shouldn't be out there campaigning. It also forbade the use of government funds for political purposes, as well as the collection of campaign contributions from people receiving relief payments. Like, hey, we're giving you a check so you can eat. You got to pay us back. You got to contribute to our campaign. That was made illegal. This is the percentage of workforce unemployed through the Depression. See, in Germany, it spiked in 1932, and then Hitler took over. Ooh, and then the military. Hey, oh, that's bad. The United States spikes in 32, slowly goes there, you get a little bit more of an uptick right there, and then the United Kingdom. The index of industrial production, everything goes down here. You can see what the United States did the rest of the world. This is that Roosevelt recession right here. Germany starts making its war machine to invade all of Europe. So opponents of the New Deal charged that the president was spending too much money on his programs. He increased the national debt, kind of hooked the government on spending. From 32 to 39, the national debt increased from 19 billion to 40 billion, which I think our current government says, hold my beer and watch this. We have 22 trillion in debt. That's nothing. That's chump change. Not even the interest on our $22 trillion debt. The federal government became much more powerful under FDR. It really controlled the nation, really kind of took the lead of the modern government that we have today. This is the era of big government that regulates everything, that's involved with everything, that has substantial funding programs to help people of all different backgrounds and necessities. There's safety nets in place to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen again, that there's measures to make sure people can't buy stock on margin, and there's ways to make sure that the reform piece of the New Deal actually worked. And it's true, we haven't had a depression since, knock on wood. It regulated the economy. No longer is the United States laissez-faire economic, is a free enterprise. Totally, we have a regulated economy. You could argue that, going to the Federal Reserve, that kind of already started. The New Deal, I want to make note and make sure you know this. The New Deal did not end the Depression. The New Deal did not end the Depression. It just kind of eased the suffering and made the people feel like the government was doing something for them. World War II ends the Depression. Before America enters the war, selling guns to the Allies and preparing for war is what ultimately ends the Depression and gets people back to work. It did give temporary relief to the citizens, and it's not until World War II that the unemployment problem was solved, and it fundamentally changes how Americans view the government. Americans today, if something bad happens, they expect the government to bail it out. Like Hurricane Katrina, an unfortunate incident in 2005 that destroyed New Orleans and caused homelessness and death and everything. And people were upset that FEMA, the government agency for emergencies like that, did not respond fast enough. In fact, good old Kanye West, when on the televised, basically one of those fundraisers, a televised fundraiser, said that George Bush doesn't care about black people on the air because he didn't feel that the government's response to this hurricane was fast enough. And that kind of shows the mentality of Americans today, that if something goes wrong, we don't pull ourselves up, cliche, by our own bootstraps. We don't rely on private enterprise or private charities. The government should fix it. This is a painting of the Employment Agency by Isaac Sawyer from 1937. And so the balance sheet. Supporters argued that the relief, not the economy, was the primary objective of the war on the Depression. This wasn't to fix it, it was just to help the people out. FDR believed that the government was morally bound to prevent mass hunger and starvation by managing the economy. And the strange thing is when you have this many people out of work and suffering, there's no revolution, there's no riots. It's just strange. He potentially saved capitalism by eliminating some of its worst faults. Poor labor conditions, some of the wide sweeping changes in terms of workers and worker relations, that helps prevent communism and fascism coming to power, because capitalism, you can make it work if you have some safety nets. Had his programs not been implemented, socialism could have taken a hold of the nation. FDR was Hamiltonian in terms that he supported the big government, but he also was kind of Jeffersonian, going back to our founding fathers, that he supported the forgotten man. He's a remarkable president. We haven't even talked about the second half of his presidency, which is World War II, which is coming up. You're probably wondering what this is. So my grandma, excuse me, lived through the Depression, lived through the Dust Bowl in Kansas, and they lost their farms, they lost everything, and it never left her. When we moved her to her senior housing in the bottom of the closet in the very back, we found this suitcase, and we thought it was money, and it turns out it was just ramen noodles. Every nook and cranny in my grandmother's house had food because she never wanted to go hungry again, and she made sure that she always had enough just in case an emergency ever came up. That's what the Great Depression did to people, and it still lasts till to this day. People that were raised by people like my grandma, who raised my father, who raised me. So when my kids argue that I'm cheap, it's not my fault. It's the Great Depression's fault. Here's our skipper, President Roosevelt, leading the people to recovery, and the detractors yelling at him. That guy's pretty ugly right there. All right, hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions.